I've reached my limit. Please, let's get a divorce. It was the breaking point after enduring so much. Lying on the hospital bed, I clearly stated my intention to my husband and mother-in-law despite looking down. A moment of silence followed. As I timidly looked up, my husband and mother-in-law were distorting their faces with laughter. A divorce? You're just after my money, aren't you? Just so you know, you won't get a dime of my wealth even if we divorce. My husband said mockingly. He doesn't understand anything. When did I ever say I was after his property? Next to such a husband, my mother-in-law made a gesture as if shooing me away coldly. If you're going to divorce, take your child with you. She's not cute at all. I don't need such a granddaughter. My mother-in-law spat out maliciously, as tears began to well up in the eyes of my young daughter, who was holding my hand. With my trembling hand, I gripped my daughter's small hand tightly in return. How could they say such terrible things? I'm not interested in my husband's money. I couldn't forgive my mother-in-law for making my precious daughter cry. As I held my daughter's hand, the two of them sneered at us from the corner of their eyes. At this moment, they couldn't have imagined that a future where they would hit rock bottom was waiting for them. I am Chloe, a 34-year-old homemaker struggling with child-rearing. The encounter with my husband Alex happened in college. From the first time we talked, our conversation flowed, and after several passionate advances from him, we started dating and eventually walked down the aisle. After graduating from college, as my husband decided to return to his hometown for work, I followed him upon marriage. I didn't know anyone in my husband's hometown, but living close to the in-laws seemed convenient for various reasons according to my husband's wishes, and coincidentally, there was an available apartment near the in-laws' house, so we decided to live there. While my father-in-law, who was dignified yet gentle, and my mother-in-law, who seemed a bit strict, and I didn't have any major troubles, we maintained a good distance. Although I was bewildered at times in a new place, I managed to secure employment locally by leveraging a qualification I had earned in college. The busy yet peaceful days were happy, and life with my husband was very fun. Then, one day, I discovered I was pregnant. I was so happy because I had always wanted children. Thinking about the future, I planned to return to work after taking maternity leave, but my husband said, I want to take care of the baby, I want the mother to be by the child's side, and I found myself agreeing with him, so I decided to quit my job. Above all, I remember feeling reassured when he said, leave the financial aspects to me. But, being pregnant wasn't all joy. When I announced the pregnancy to my in-laws, my father-in-law congratulated us with joy, but my mother-in-law showed no sign of happiness, her expression remaining stiff. The only thing my mother-in-law pressed on me was pressure. You're pregnant? Make sure it's a boy. My mother-in-law's words weighed heavily on me. It didn't matter to me whether it was a boy or a girl, but my mother-in-law, wanting an heir, strongly desired a boy. I smiled and brushed it off at the moment to avoid any unnecessary trouble, but inside, I thought that I wasn't having a child for my in-laws. Now that I'm going to be a mother, I thought I should be able to keep a calm face even under pressure. But that was only at the beginning. The harshness continued for a long time, and it became impossible to just smile and brush it off. Meals that used to taste good before pregnancy now made me nauseous just by looking at them. My cravings changed frequently, I couldn't eat properly, and I gradually started staying at home more. Doing anything was hard. Even in such a difficult situation, when I was lying down feeling sick, my husband unreasonably demanded that I move. What about my dinner tonight? Sorry, the morning sickness has been really bad. I haven't made it yet. I thought I messaged you that it was okay to eat out. Huh? Morning sickness isn't an illness, right? Then don't slack off on the housework. How many times have you skipped cooking? He sighed heavily in exasperation and glared at me. If I could, I would also like to do the housework. But with constant nausea, it was difficult to do any housework. My husband would not forgive me. All I could do was apologize while suppressing my nausea. It's not an illness, but I feel nauseous all the time. I'm sorry, I'll rest a bit more and then start cooking. Resting again? Can't you even manage your health? Seriously, give me a break. I'm supporting you with my money, after all. Staggering to my feet, I prepared my husband's meal while enduring his sarcasm. Since the morning sickness started, my husband's morally questionable comments have become more noticeable. He used to say he would take care of the financial side, but where did that reliability go? The pressure from my mother-in-law, who occasionally came to check on me, made my morning sickness feel even worse. The only one who scolded them was my father-in-law, who showed understanding for my situation. Both of you, calm down. Chloe is nurturing a child in her belly. Let's try not to burden her as much as possible. When my dignified father-in-law spoke, both my mother-in-law and husband fell silent. I was very grateful for my father-in-law's presence. With his help, I managed to get through the tough period of morning sickness and reached the day of delivery. The baby born was a girl. Her name is Sarah. She was so small and cute, truly the apple of my eye. My husband was also happy about our daughter. As for my in-laws, while my father-in-law doted on her, my mother-in-law didn't pay her any attention at all. What are you planning on having a girl? Such a failure of a wife. My mother-in-law, who had wanted a boy, was indifferent towards my daughter and stabbed me with even sharper words than when I was pregnant. Even when my daughter tried to approach my mother-in-law to play, she would immediately go somewhere else as if saying don't come any closer. My husband didn't even try to admonish his mother. Moreover, although he was initially happy right after my daughter was born, as soon as he realized how hard parenting was, he declared, "Housework and childcare are a woman's job," and left everything to me without offering any help. Even though she was his precious child, he wouldn't even make time to play with our daughter. My young daughter could feel she was being treated coldly, saying, "I don't really like Daddy and Grandma," and didn't warm up to my husband or mother-in-law. It was a natural outcome, yet my husband and mother-in-law seemed dissatisfied that she wasn't affectionate towards them. Parenting isn't easy. The only one who offered a helping hand and cared about my daughter was my father-in-law, the sole person. Whether it was helping with the chores and saying I should rest, or soothing my daughter, I can't express how much his presence helped. However, the one person who was a source of strength, my father-in-law, fell and injured his leg while out and had to be hospitalized. That's when my mother-in-law's rampage began. With my father-in-law not around to see, she began summoning me and my daughter to the in-laws' house frequently, overwhelmed as I was with unfamiliar childcare and mounting chores. "Chloe? Since you're not working, could you do the cleaning? And, I'd also appreciate it if you could do the shopping," she would say, making me take care of the chores at the in-laws and even driving her to her classes. My mother-in-law wasn't working either, so she should have had the time. If I protested, despite my daughter being right there, the sarcasm would come back tenfold. Hating that, I gradually stopped resisting. My husband did absolutely nothing in terms of childcare or housework, and just lounged around when he came to his parents' house. It seemed my mother-in-law thought it was okay as long as I was moving, never once reprimanding my lazy husband. It happened on the way back from a shopping trip I was on with my daughter. Around the corner near my in-laws' house, I could hear my mother-in-law talking with someone from the neighborhood. I naturally stopped and accidentally overheard their conversation. "My daughter-in-law is useless. So slow at everything. She's no match for my son, it's so annoying." My mother-in-law was gleefully gossiping about me. And several people were laughing in agreement as if to ridicule me. If she thought I was so bad, she could do the chores herself. I wonder if she's always thought this since before we got married. Unconsciously, I gripped my daughter's hand tighter. The conversation escalated, and they even began complaining about my daughter. "And you know, the granddaughter is really not cute at all. She doesn't warm up to anyone. That's definitely the mother's fault." I quickly covered my daughter's ears, but she seemed to catch a bit of it, her expression clouding. The reason she wasn't affectionate wasn't me, it was my mother-in-law. Due to my mother-in-law spreading complaints, we gradually began to be whispered about by the neighbors and looked at suspiciously. I wanted to rely on someone, but my own parents lived so far away I'd need to take a bullet train, and I had no close friends to turn to. If things continued this way, I might go insane. Though I hadn't thought it through completely, the word divorce inevitably crossed my mind. At the very least, I should try to reduce the time I spend at home to avoid unnecessary contact with the in-laws. Starting work could help me distance myself from the in-laws and also prepare for the future. Though it means more to do housework, childcare, and work, I desperately want to put distance between us and the in-laws. For that, I needed to put my daughter in daycare. Without mentioning wanting to distance from the in-laws, I broached the subject with my husband, hoping for a sliver of hope, but he frowned and yelled at me. Of course, that's out of the question. Wanting to leave your child with someone else, are you even a real mother? You think it's okay to just make things easier for yourself? How could he say that to me? He spends his days off lazing around and doesn't help with our daughter at all. I tried to argue that I wasn't looking to make things easier for myself, but to my astonishment, he immediately started calling my mother-in-law. As if me going to work was the problem, my husband tattled, and upon hearing this, my mother-in-law came flying from the in-laws' house. Daycare? What are you thinking? It's only natural for a mother to stay home and take care of the house. You really are a failure as a wife. Realize that you married into this family. My mother-in-law pointed her finger at me, fury apparent. Essentially, they want me to be a convenient housekeeper. If I went to work, they'd lose their easily exploitable pawn. Being ganged up on by the two of them, I was given no chance to retort, and following more snide remarks from my mother-in-law the next day, the discussions about daycare and going to work eventually fell through. Even after my father-in-law was discharged from the hospital, the days of being summoned by my mother-in-law whenever my father-in-law was away continued. Faced with snide remarks and being tasked with errands without any defense from my husband, my heart grew increasingly clouded. Gradually, I found myself unable to eat, and sleepless nights became more frequent. There were moments when sudden stomach pains would strike, or tears would fall for no sad reason at all. Seeing me silently cry, my daughter looked at me with worry. This couldn't go on. I was burdening my young daughter with worry. With that thought, I started visiting a psychiatrist and a gastroenterologist. Both departments suggested that the likely cause was severe stress. I had plenty of reasons to believe them. Should I get a divorce? Though the thought of divorce crossed my mind repeatedly, divorcing would mean taking away the figure of a father from my daughter. And I hadn't even secured a job yet. Wondering if it was really okay to proceed with the divorce, I found it hard to take the first step. However, as a means of self-defense, I started carrying a voice recorder, just in case. It might come in handy. While I hoped never to need it, having something to hold on to helped me maintain my sanity. One day it happened. While my husband and father-in-law were at work as usual, I received the usual call from my mother-in-law. She ordered me to clean the second floor. Knowing refusal would lead to verbal abuse, I headed upstairs to clean as instructed. That's when it happened. As I was stepping on the staircase, my vision suddenly swayed. It was an unexpected bout of dizziness. As I clutched my head, my body began to tilt backward. I tumbled down the stairs in a cascade. When I came to, I was crouching in pain in the hallway on the first floor. Pain throbbed throughout my body. My head felt foggy, and I couldn't move. Perhaps alerted by the noise, my mother-in-law came to check on me. Despite the intense pain, I was grateful that she came. Since it was difficult to get up due to the pain, I pleaded with my mother-in-law to call an ambulance. However, she just laughed scornfully and refused to call one. Calling an ambulance would make the neighbors think something's happened. Don't be so dramatic, take the bus. And really, lying there in such a state is utterly disgraceful. I was speechless at my mother-in-law's response. I never thought I'd be told to take the bus while unable to get up. This was beyond mere harassment. Even in such a moment, it became painfully clear that my mother-in-law wouldn't lend a hand. That left me no choice but to fend for myself. All right. Please take care of Sarah for a while. Huh? Take her with you. Are you even listening? I wanted to take my daughter with me, but it wasn't feasible to bring such a young child in my current state. I couldn't protect her and might even put her in danger. Reluctantly leaving Sarah behind, I managed to stand up against the wall, enduring the pain beside my ranting mother-in-law. Even grabbing my bag was a struggle. There was no way I could walk to the bus stop in this condition. Opting for a taxi instead of the bus, I somehow made it to the hospital despite the excruciating pain. The diagnosis was a fracture. Failing to break my fall resulted in a severe enough injury to require hospitalization. Though it would be for a short period, the thought of informing my husband and mother-in-law was daunting. Still, I couldn't just not tell them, so I reluctantly made the call, and they came to my hospital room, irate, with Sarah in tow. My frightened daughter immediately ran to my bed, gripping my hand tightly. Tears were welling up in her eyes. Immediately after, my husband and mother-in-law began to yell loudly. "What the hell are you doing, using my money for a taxi on your own? I can't believe you'd leave Anna with me and go to the hospital. Because of this child, I couldn't go to my knitting class. What are you going to do about it?" Their relentless verbal abuse made my stomach turn. There was no concern for me at all. If only my husband had been cooperative, if only my mother-in-law hadn't assigned me chores, I wouldn't have had the dizzy spell on the staircase. The selfishness of their words only made my stomach churn more. To be treated like a housekeeper and to have my precious daughter looked down upon. The thought of enduring this for decades more was enough to drive me to despair. I couldn't take it anymore. "I've reached my limit. Please, let's get a divorce." Even though I was looking down, my voice was small yet clear when I expressed my desire for a divorce to my husband and mother-in-law. I had been hesitant for so long, but my situation had pushed me to the edge. A moment of silence followed. As I timidly looked up, my husband and mother-in-law were laughing. "A divorce? You're after my money, aren't you? Just so you know, you won't get a penny of my wealth even if we divorce. If you're going to divorce, then take Sarah with you. She's not cute at all, I don't need such a granddaughter." Thinking I couldn't possibly divorce without a job, they carelessly spewed their words and smirked as they left the hospital room. In the quiet hospital, I struggled to hold back tears. I was stroking my daughter's head. I had finally broached the topic of divorce. Though I had been concerned about separating Sarah from her father, the toxic environment was something I could no longer allow for my daughter. Unable to leave my daughter with my husband and mother-in-law who had just left, I called my parents with a sliver of hope. It had been a while since I heard my parents' voices. I briefly told them about possibly getting a divorce, my fracture, and the need for them to take care of Sarah until I was discharged. They traveled for hours to reach me. "Chloe! Are you okay?" My parents looked at me and my daughter with frantic concern. As I detailed what my husband and mother-in-law had done, my parents listened intently, their faces turning stern. It was comforting to have someone genuinely listen. They couldn't stand to hear their child was suffering. Even just having someone to listen would have been enough, but after saying, "Just wait here for us," they went to confront my in-laws despite my attempts to stop them. When my parents returned, they shared what had happened at the in-laws. My father-in-law, who had come back from work, was also there. After hearing everything from my parents, he immediately apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for any hurt caused to your precious daughter." He then scolded my husband and mother-in-law, saying, "How could you do such terrible things while I was away, and what do you think of your granddaughter?" My husband and mother-in-law showed no remorse, spouting convenient excuses like, "The slow daughter-in-law is to blame and we only gave her tasks because she seemed idle." If this is the state even after being scolded, then there's nothing more that can be done. Seeing no change in their attitude, my parents were thoroughly disillusioned and firmly supported my decision to divorce. After a brief hospital stay, I was discharged and went straight to the in-laws' house, divorce papers in hand. "I'm going to divorce. There's no need to humble myself before my husband and mother-in-law anymore." As I expressed my intention to divorce at the in-laws, my husband suddenly lost his temper and yelled at me. "Are you serious? You can't possibly get a divorce without a job. Besides, you got scolded by Dad because of you." Still holding a grudge about being scolded by his father, He ranted and blamed me. "It's your fault for getting scolded, isn't it? Anyway, I'm going to divorce you." I would have been disheartened before, but I remained firm. My husband, blaming me for his faults, seemed childish. After emphasizing my decision to divorce, my mother-in-law grabbed my arm and shook it violently. "Chloe, you must have seduced my husband with your wiles, you thief. That's ridiculous. Let go of me." When did I ever seduce anyone? I shook off my mother-in-law's grip. As my husband glared and my mother-in-law raised her hand as if to strike, my father-in-law shouted at them both to stop. "Enough, both of you. This is disgraceful." With a stern rebuke from my father-in-law, both my husband and mother-in-law shrank back. His voice, full of anger, was slightly frightening even to me. The room fell silent. My husband, sweating profusely, fell silent, while my mother-in-law began to tremble. Baring her teeth and clenching her jaw, tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. Her gaze was fixed on my father-in-law. "What's this? Always taking Chloe's side. Aren't you my husband? Why won't you support me? You must have a relationship with that thief," she shrieked, now turning her accusations towards my father-in-law. It was all baseless accusations. But my mother-in-law didn't stop. As she rambled on with her absurd accusations, my father-in-law yelled back even louder. "Enough already. You're being stopped because what you're saying is nonsensical. And there you go again, taking Chloe's side. Disgusting. Traitor." Without listening, my mother-in-law, now completely hysterical, began to throw anything she could grab, like cushions and potholders. She did that indiscriminately, even dangerously. When it became clear this was getting out of hand, I tried to intervene, but then a plate my mother-in-law threw shattered with a loud crash. Sharp shards flew past, grazing my father-in-law's cheek and drawing blood. "Are you okay?" I hurriedly pulled out a handkerchief from my bag and pressed it against his cheek to stop the bleeding. Seeing her husband injured finally made my mother-in-law stop. After a moment of stunned silence, she snapped back to reality, glaring at me as if catching me in a fault. "It's not my fault. Look at her, putting on a show with her handkerchief. The thief reveals her true colors. Does she not comprehend what she's done?" Her incomprehensible frenzy continued. Seemingly influenced by my mother-in-law, my husband then began frantically messing up his hair, raising a mad cry. "It's all your fault, our family is a mess. I'll discard you myself." In his excited state, he violently signed the divorce papers left on the table. Seeing this, I quickly gathered the papers and said to my father-in-law, "Thank you for everything up until now. Please be assured that Alex and his mother will face the consequences of their actions." With a final disdainful remark to my mother-in-law and husband, I swiftly packed the few belongings I had and left the chaotic in-laws' house. The divorce papers, now signed, were successfully filed and the divorce was finalized. Finally, I could escape my husband and mother-in-law. A sigh of relief escaped me. Yet, just divorcing wasn't enough to settle my feelings. I returned to my parents' house and began preparations to file for compensation with a lawyer. I had endured all the terrible treatment. I wouldn't spare those two any longer. Presenting the voice recorder I'd been carrying as a talisman, along with records of my visits to the psychiatrist, it seemed they could be used to prove the mental stress I suffered, allowing for a lump sum claim for compensation against my husband and mother-in-law. How much I've suffered up to now. As if vindicating years of grievances, I nodded vigorously and proceeded with the claim. Then came a period of tranquility, and 13 days after returning to my parents' house, my smartphone kept ringing. The caller ID showed it was my husband. The divorce was already finalized, and I was supposed to communicate through my lawyer now, so there was no need for me to answer. Initially, I ignored the calls, but they kept coming, non-stop. Reluctantly, I decided to answer. "Hello.
Chloe! Is that you? Alex is in big trouble. It's all because of you, so come quickly."
The voice on the phone was my mother-in-law's. In a state of panic, It was hard to understand what was being said. From the other end of the phone, I could hear my husband's screams and a man's shouts of anger. Somehow, I managed to piece together from my incoherent mother-in-law that, after being served with the demand for alimony, my husband had lost it and was on his way to rant at my parents' house when he was stopped for questioning by a patrolling officer. In his excited state, my husband lashed out and struck the officer. He was trying to prove that it was my fault for filing for alimony, and this confrontation with the police officer started while he was calling me. My mother-in-law had taken over the call, she explained.
You wouldn't have had to deal with this if you hadn't demanded alimony. Can't you, his wife, explain that it's not Alex's fault? After all, it's all because of you, isn't it? Hurry up, or Alex will get arrested.
My mother-in-law demanded frantically. Unlike when I was at the in-laws, my mind was clear. I had no intention of making excuses for my husband now. It was his own doing. I told my mother-in-law calmly. No, I won't. This all started because you and Alex treated me like a maid. He brought this upon himself. The divorce papers have already been filed. You are strangers to me now, so this has nothing to do with me.
So what?
Wait. Make sure to pay the alimony in full. Goodbye. Ignoring my mother-in-law's pleading voice, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. It felt as if a fog had lifted from my heart. This was how I severed ties with them and reclaimed my peaceful days. Months later, I heard from my father-in-law about how Alex and my mother-in-law were doing. Alex had resisted arrest after attacking the police officer and was arrested for obstructing official business. He ended up with a criminal record, and after the story spread to his workplace, he was fired. He is now using his savings to send child support and alimony. My mother-in-law is now looked down upon by the entire neighborhood for treating me like a servant, in addition to her son's police incident, and being divorced and abandoned by my father-in-law. She has never worked before, but now, to pay for alimony and living expenses, she seems to be struggling with unfamiliar jobs. I felt no pity for my husband and mother-in-law. They truly got what they deserved. Disgusted by the whole ordeal, my father-in-law decided to divorce and left to start a new life, happily sharing his plans with me. Leaving the house to my husband and mother-in-law, my father-in-law proved to be a compassionate person until the end. As for me, I've found employment using my qualifications and am working. My parents help with childcare, and Sarah is delighted with all the love she receives. I've reconnected with old friends and am now living a fulfilled life, true to myself.